Let me stop sharing this little background that would have normally been an intro while you and I sat quietly. And let me welcome everybody. Steve, I'll be right back and I'll introduce you. Yeah, that it's never going to happen, right? So let me welcome everybody and tell them what we're doing, and then I'll come back and introduce you, and then we will kick this off. Everybody, I do want you to know that this webinar is being recorded because not every league member was able to join us today, and so we're going to make it available to everybody on demand starting Monday. So if y'all have someone in your organization you think will benefit from this, just know that you'll get a link from all of us so everyone can watch this. By the way, I don't know if y'all are hearing that in the background, but my dog has fallen to sleep and he's having a dream. So he's barking in his sleep.
I can't hear it.
I want to let everyone know that LHAT has announced the dates for our national conference. We are once again going to do a virtual in hopes that in 2022 we can all be back together again, but save the dates July 12th, 13th, and 14th. A portion of the conference, just like we did last year, will be live for a few hours each day, and a portion will be on demand. So we'll be doing webinars again leading up to the conference and making those all on demand during the conference. We're going to make this one on demand immediately just because we think it's very timely. Also, I want to remind you, if you have a question, I can't always, with everything going on, I can't monitor what's happening over in the chat. Like, I should probably open that up right now and see if anyone's trying to say anything. So if you have a question that you want answered today, and I hope that you'll have a lot, if you'll use the Q&A icon, and I don't know where that appears on your phones, but if you're doing your computer, it's there at the bottom of the screen. But just look for it. It says Q&A, and that way I'll know that there's a question. And if you see that someone has already asked your question, you can just vote it with a thumbs up, and that allows it to go to the top of the list. And we know that we have more than one person wanting an answer to that. And I want to remind y'all, most of y'all remember me when I ran the Paramount and State Theaters. So oftentimes when we're talking, I know exactly what you're dealing with because I've run a venue similar to what you're doing. I have been, though, with the league now for enough years that I've never run a venue during a pandemic. So I might not know everything that to be asking Steve. So it's real important that y'all put the questions in the Q&A if you're needing something that I'm not otherwise asking. So be sure and use that Q&A thing, and I'll remind you of that. So let me now just, I feel like a nighttime talk show host, Steve, because I'm welcoming you back. You're my first return speaker. Well, welcome back.
Welcome back. It's been a year, hasn't it?
Yes, it has. Real quick, let me make sure in case anyone doesn't remember you from last year. Steve Adelman is the Vice President for the Event Safety Alliance, an organization dedicated to promoting life safety first throughout all phases of event production and execution. Which, boy, didn't that become really relevant this past year. Steve is head of the Adelman Law Group in Scottsdale, Arizona. His law practice focuses on risk management and litigation regarding live events throughout North America. He also serves as an expert witness in crowd-related lawsuits. That's got to be fun. Steve Adelman Steve Adelman is widely recognized as an authority on event safety and security. He writes the monthly Adelman on Venues newsletter, teaches risk management in venues at Arizona State University's Sandra Day O'Connor College of Law, and he frequently appears in national and local media for analysis of safety and security incidents at public accommodations. Steve graduated from Boston College Law School, and I won't give the date, Steve, because we'll just say that
when
you and I
dinosaurs roamed the earth.
That's right. You and I have reached that age where it doesn't really matter anymore, does it? So welcome, Steve, and welcome everybody. It looks like we've got about 60 theaters here represented. I have a feeling that number is going to climb as we continue to talk and people join us. So we're here to talk about this. And if you will humor me for a minute, I want to say that while it on face value, and by the way, everyone got a link to this. If you didn't, you actually got it 3 times, but I'll send it to you again if you just send me an email. And we're going to continue to share this with our members, so it's because it's so important. But on face value, it looks like a thin document, except it's loaded with links that then take you to pages that are constantly being updated. So it's a document that's going to change because our world is changing. But I just want to tell everybody, I think the most important page of this document is actually the very first page, because it clearly states that this is not exhaustive, and we're all going to have to do a lot of guesswork based on the venue we're running and the community we're running in the state where we reside and with the health departments that we're interfacing with. So there is no end all be all when it comes to how we're going to reopen safely in a pandemic, right? We're all going to have to make some choices. And this guide gives us just sort of an overview of, if you're making choices around ventilation, here's some guidance that you can look at. But I want to jump right off the bat, Steve, and ask you, because you and I were on a call Tuesday, and the day after this was released, the CDC sent out a tweet and an email and made the national news that if you've been vaccinated, maybe wearing a mask isn't so important anymore. Have I oversimplified that with what I just said?
No.
No, that's what they said, right? And what does that do to, say, this guide?
So, all right. First, thanks for calling out the section of the safe and sound guidance that I wrote. So I appreciate that. That was not prompted, but yes, that's the portion that I wrote on the first page. When we were creating the safe and sound guidance, that was in consultation with CDC. They did not give us a heads up that the day after we dropped ours, literally less than 24 hours, I think it was like 23 hours later, CDC dropped their own guidance, which, yes, Ken, essentially declares the pandemic over for people who are fully vaccinated. Not completely, so I'm going to get on an airplane Monday morning and I will definitely wear a face covering because FAA regulations have not changed. But I joined a gym this past Saturday because I got tired of my, COVID bod, and I'm not wearing a face covering at the gym, and neither is pretty much anybody else. And I'm okay with that because I know, because I can read, and so can you, dear viewers, that whether you got the Pfizer or Moderna vaccine, you are talking about 94+% efficacy, which is far higher than all of the other vaccines that we've ever gotten in our lives. So, before, I don't know, a year or so ago, when much of what we took for granted was questioned and then, suggested was false, we were quite comfortable with vaccines that had efficacy rates really in the upper 60s and no higher. And now we are in a dramatically fantastic world where 94+% efficacy for the 2 vaccines that most Americans have gotten. I mean, that really is life-changing and justification for what CDC issued on Thursday morning.
So let me ask you, because go ahead. I'm sorry, finish.
Well, just to finish the thought, which is, if you are fully vaccinated, you don't need to wear a face covering even indoors. You are still welcome to if you feel more comfortable, or if you know that there are unvaccinated people around and you simply are freaked out by that. You can still wear a face covering. That's a choice, and still a good choice, a fine choice. But from a pure epidemiological standpoint, once you are fully vaccinated, meaning 2 weeks after your second shot, you're good to go.
So that begs the question, as a venue operator, how do I know that you've been vaccinated? And can I even ask you?
Yes, you can.
I asked you that because I knew the answer to that question.
Oh, let's go. So,
okay, wait a minute, Steve.
Viewers.
So you ready, Steve? So I'm the patron. Hey, you're violating my HIPAA rules. You can't ask me that question. Go ahead, Mr. Attorney.
Hey, patron, I'm a lawyer. So let me educate you about HIPAA. HIPAA relates to medical conditions in healthcare facilities. Vaccination status is not a medical condition. An entertainment venue, a historic American theater, is not a healthcare facility, even though occasionally someone does have a medical incident. So the 2 prongs on which HIPAA privacy rights rest do not exist in our environment. So,
okay.
Ken,
so if, dear listeners, you want to fight that battle, I wanted y'all to hear that, because Steve said that on a call I was on with him earlier this week. I wanted y'all to know that's BS. that all, and I actually have a healthcare background, so I knew that. But Steve, let's talk about, the elephant in the room, which is, should venues pick that battle? Is that at this point, if you've worked with your staff and you've done everything, whether it's everyone's gotten vaccinated or everyone has agreed to get tested to show up for work, all that stuff you may or may not do it with your staff, as long as you've taken care of your staff, are we leaving it up to patrons to decide, like, hey, your safety is now in your hands? If you've been vaccinated, good for you. If you haven't and you're not going to wear a mask, you're making that choice, and I can't really do much about it.
Well, I'm going to give you a very lawyerly answer.
Okay.
It depends. It depends. So let's talk about what that answer depends upon, because I think that this will be useful. But let's actually break this down. So it depends. So the question is, should you ask people their vaccination status? So let's take it bit by bit. First of all, who are we talking about? Are we talking about staff and contractors, or are we talking about patrons?
Let's start with staff and contractors. Let's start with that.
That is the right place to start.
Yeah.
Staff and contractors should be incredibly eager to get back to work, because these 15 months have been brutal, obviously. And so we are the absolute most incentivized people to get the vaccine. Not only is it magnificently effective from a health and safety standpoint, but it is also our ticket back to work around other people, which is the only way that any of us do work.
Right.
Ken, notwithstanding that you and I are both in our home offices right now, we know that the work we do is in public accommodations.
Correct.
And even during load in and load out, we're always with other people. So this is part 1A, and then we'll do 1B in just a second. 1A is, should you, if you are in a position to hire people, should you insist upon proof of vaccination from anyone who would draw a paycheck from you? My answer, and this is the one that I'm giving to my clients, is a resounding yes. I strongly recommend that everyone who draws a paycheck from my clients show proof of vaccination, because it's healthy and because it gives other people confidence that they can work healthy as well. So we are a highly incentivized group.
Are there any exceptions that we should be aware of? Are there medical, religious, or other reasons for someone to legitimately say to their employer, I can't get vaccinated?
I'm a lawyer, not a doctor, so I cannot speak to medically other than what I have read. Again, I read a lot of this stuff, and nobody watching this conversation has to take my word for it. You can go on the same websites that I do. I live on cdc.org. I look at who.org. I'm a frequent visitor to the Johns Hopkins Medical School's website, which is jhu.edu, and then some medical suffixes. I am not aware of any medical reason that someone cannot get vaccinated, and that includes pregnant women. So if someone says, I have a medical reason, to me, that is probably code for I don't want to.
Right. And
again, from a work context, those are simply not people that I want to work with.
Yeah. Now, I'm going to touch on a third rail here, but I have a couple of nieces that are either pregnant or wanting to get pregnant, and they're claiming that they've been advised not to get vaccinated.
That guidance has changed.
So that's not necessarily true anymore, or maybe it was never true, but I meant it's that we have research to be able to respond to that. Okay.
Yes. And bear in mind, with coronavirus, everything is new. And so it doesn't make sense for us to cling to guidance or information that is 6 months old, 8 months old. Remember when this pandemic first started, we were all advised to wear gloves and, clean high-touch surfaces every half hour. Within 2 months, that guidance all went away. because it became readily apparent through testing that the really exclusive means of transmission was through our aerosolized droplets, not high-touch surfaces. So even with regard to pregnant women or women looking to get pregnant, the vaccine does not affect either of those circumstances. Not like you're going to get a lot of pregnant women who want to do load in and load out, but we don't want to discriminate against anyone either. And so the latest scientific information is the vaccines are perfectly healthy and safe even for pregnant or lactating women.
Okay.
I think is great news.
Real quick, let me do some homework here because I see someone put a question in the chat. I won't necessarily see a question if it goes into the chat. If you'll use the Q&A, all of you, if you've got questions for Steve or for me, or if we can't answer it, you know how the league works, we'll research it and get you an answer. If you'll put those in the Q&A feature, that way I'll make sure that it gets answered. If it's in the chat, I may or may not see it. So just want to let you know that. So Steve, I'm gonna share my screen for just a second because everyone on this call should have gotten this, but just in case they didn't, this is what we're talking about, and the league is pushing this out to everyone. And you've heard us early on talk about this here, right here, face coverings, and that the CDC made that announcement after the day after this dropped. But I actually, when I was reading food and beverage, it got me to thinking. I wrote myself a note, a deterrent, and that got me to thinking that sometimes we're just doing things just to minimize our risk, right? And sometimes we're doing them just for a public
health theater.
Yeah, there you go. Thank you for what a great description.
Well, it's
right. We're doing it to make it look safer, even though maybe we're doing something that really isn't necessary anymore.
Yeah. So let's talk about health theater, and then we'll come back to answering the long and detailed question, which I think has real merit and is worth our time. What constitutes health theater changes over time. So let's first define our term and then let's apply it. Health theater is a term borrowed from security theater, which was pejorative. Security theater was a term that really meant the very thinnest veneer of enhancing security without actually improving security arrangements in fact. So anything that is mere theater, the presumption is it's bad because it's worthless. I take a different view of that. I think when something is theater, it can help to create a culture that respects either security in the old-timey days when we had crowds, or health, as we now need people to respect public health guidance when they come to your venues. The problem with something that is truly only health theater is people won't believe in it. And if people don't believe that social distancing is going to matter, if face coverings are going to, mitigate the risk of infection, if they don't believe those things, then requiring them has no effect that's positive at all. It just pisses people off.
Right.
So the problem with what you now see in the Safe in Sound guidance that we released last Wednesday is the CDC guidance that was released last Thursday renders some of what we wrote to be mere health theater, and really have no cultural benefit, because at this point there are a great number of people who, with good reason, with science behind them, can say social distancing is not relevant for me. I'm fully vaccinated. I want to sit next to the stranger. I want to get on the treadmill right next to that person who I think is kind of cute. So don't hate us because of our timing. Safe and Sound has a lot of good guidance in there. I guess my suggestion is note the explanations. After each piece of guidance, there's a paragraph in, I think, italics,
It is.
which explains the reasoning behind the guidance immediately above it. Now you actually have to read the explanations to see, does this rationale still apply given the CDC guidance that we got last Thursday morning?
I also think, though, this guide for all of you venue operators gives you a certain shield or I don't want to say protection, because we talked last year. I'm not worried about anyone suing you. We made sure that everyone knew that, yeah, that's not what we have to worry about. But if you've got someone who wants to pick that fight with you, or is just, being a thorn in your side, you've now got a guidance that not only has been reviewed by the CDC, but has been endorsed by dozens of major organizations, that represent venues coast to coast, in some cases globally, that you can tell your patrons, look, these are the accepted guidelines within the industry, and I'm following them to the best of our ability to follow them. And we started this by saying there are some things that are no longer going to apply or can't apply because of your particular venue. But if you're using this guide to do everything possible that you can, then I think you have the ability to sort of, without arguing, respond to patrons or artists or staff. These are the guidelines that we've chosen to follow and why. And nobody else has put out anything better at this point. So, these are the accepted best practices.
Yeah, so let's go back to, our list of responses, my sort of decision tree of, should you require vaccinations? So with regard to people that you're paying, my answer is an unqualified yes. And you can. Let's go to 1B, which is patrons. Can you require them to show proof of vaccination? Yes, you can, because HIPAA does not apply. There is no privacy issue here. Certainly there's no privacy right. There is no privacy issue. But really, it's going to depend on where you are located. I'm in Arizona, where, ask our governor, we never really experienced the pandemic here. Obviously, we did. We were actually worst in the nation for most of the pandemic. Our vaccine rollout has been fantastic. It's been great here. But Arizona was worst in the nation in most of the relevant statistical categories. Usually we can sort of smirk and look down at Alabama and Mississippi, and now they were doing whatever they do and looking down on us, and frankly it was pretty humiliating. It depends on where you are. In the Northeast there is considerably greater compliance, a more positive attitude about everything related to public health guidance. There are parts of the country where that won't fly as easily. So you're going to have to know your own demographic.
We've actually
probably do.
Yeah, well, we've talked about that in the league, because historic theaters, by their very nature, are very, very embedded within their communities. And in some cases, the historic theater may be the only access to arts and entertainment within their smaller community. So, we know our patrons, we know our community closely, and we said that early on. It depends on where your theater is located for some of this stuff. Yeah. I'm in a very blue area of Texas, so the way Austin is approaching things is very different than the way Houston or Dallas is approaching things. My board president is in Newberry, South Carolina, and she and I have often sort of compared notes to, say, our friends that are in New York City that are trying to get Broadway back open. And it really does depend on where you're located, and how well you know your community, and whether or not, I keep using the word pick that fight only because we're all thinking of those videos that we've seen where, the one person gets really upset and throws a fit.
Call her Karen.
I have a good friend named Karen, and she hates it, but it just fits. My apologies to any Karens that we might have in the audience. But so again, I want to reiterate that this guide, it says it on the first page that you're going to have to do some guesswork on what applies to you and what doesn't, and what's what's more important and what's less important. What can you actually do versus what can't you do? But what ultimately what you're trying to do is minimize the risk of anyone getting sick.
Yeah, and I'm going to push back on the word guesswork. I don't think it is guesswork.
Okay, good.
I think we all know stuff. We know about our own circumstances. We know about the demographics that, that fill our houses when we can have full capacity houses. We know our people. So it's not guesswork. It's a matter of applying what you know to the circumstances that exist right now. So again, where I'm located in Scottsdale, Arizona, we can do full capacity right now today.
So can we.
And yeah, and there is demand for that, but it's very situational. Our movie theaters still empty. Our stadiums are not at full capacity yet, but they will be very soon. But it's Arizona, and we're just entering our terribly hot season. So there will be limited capacity here because there's just not that much demand to go outdoors. In other parts of the country, there is massive demand, and they're still having capacity limits as they reopen in stages. I was talking with someone from New York City yesterday. We were recording the Event Safety podcast, and the subject was reopening New York.
Yeah.
And we had someone from, downstate in New York City and someone from upstate, and we were comparing notes. And even there, within the state of New York, their circumstances were somewhat different. So I don't think it's guesswork. I think it's applying the knowledge that we all have to figure out what is the willingness, what is the eagerness versus what is the reticence or reluctance that people have. And basically, you're going to have to try stuff and be committed to being flexible, which is almost an oxymoron. You have to commit to flexibility to find that sweet spot, because, where you are, Ken, you could probably reopen to 100% capacity, can't you?
Yes, we're allowed to. Now, what I would tell you, in some parts of the states, they're doing that. Austin will be slowly getting back because we have a different political, I hate that we politicize this, but we did. And Austin has a different political climate than most of the rest of the state of Texas. But
Right.
That said, the University of Texas made the news yesterday. From this point forward, and that is the biggest institution here in our city, masks for anything at the university are now optional, which means the next time that 110,000 seat football stadium fills up, I promise you, there will be 5 masks and 109,995 non-masked people. That's just the way it's going to go.
So let me, I feel like I'm a bit of a pitch man for vaccines. I actually recorded if any of you are LinkedIn friends of mine, you saw my, minute and 15-second rant in favor of vaccines just yesterday. And if you haven't seen it, look up my LinkedIn page. It's fun. But let's be very clear, who still has the risk of infection from sitting in a 100,000 seat stadium with 100,000 people? It's not the vaccinated people. We are going to be fine. It's the unvaccinated people. So, I'm not smug about this. Almost 600,000 Americans have died since this pandemic began last March. And that is horrendous and inexcusable. But at this point, when quite literally, vaccines are as readily available as bananas. I have to buy a banana at my local Safeway supermarket, but I can get a vaccine shot for free at that Safeway.
Right.
There is no excuse for someone not getting vaccinated. So when venues are reopened to 100% capacity, as they will soon, if not already, the people who are going to incur the risk of infection are not you and me who are vaccinated. It's the people who have said, not real. I'm mainlining my, right-wing media and this thing is all bunk. They're the ones who are going to have the risk of getting sick.
Right. So you said something that let's find out who we've got here. You mentioned whether or not people are 100% open. Everybody, so we've got questions that I'm gonna go to next, but before that, let's take a quick poll. I want to find out how many of us are open, about to open, completely open, not there yet. So I'm about to launch a poll. If you'll just take just a minute, it's 2 questions, and then we'll discuss the results. So what is your current status? Are you fully open, partially open, mostly still dark with no in-person events, or are you completely still dark? And then the second question, when do you think you will be fully open? Are you open now, end of summer, sometime this fall, not until end of year or early 2022?
Right,
we're
so
more all over the map than I thought we were going to be.
Yeah, so this popped open on my screen, but I can't vote, but we're fully open here in Arizona.
Yeah, okay. I'm going to share this in just a minute with it. I'll share the results with it. Just let almost everybody has answered. Let me give y'all just a few more minutes to answer, and then we'll all look at these. But I can see the results as they came in, and it's more spread out than I thought it would be. Okay.
Well, because the population centers are, they're being more conservative, and the Pacific Northwest is quite slow still.
Yeah. So I hope, let's see. Okay, share results. Okay, so can we all, I think, Steve, can you see those?
I can, thank you.
So right now, 10% of us on this call are fully open. 60% are partially open. But we still have, over 30% that are mostly dark or completely dark. End of summer seems to be the spot where a lot of people think that they're going to be fully open sometime this fall. And just a couple of months ago, everybody was saying probably sometime this fall, but I'm not surprised that there's one person on here that's still at an unknown, and then someone else saying probably not till 2022 because of how things are playing out in different parts of the country. So,
well, I was listening to what you're going to do with your own conference.
Yeah.
So you're staying fully virtual. I'm vice president of the Event Safety Alliance. As it turns out, our annual event at Rock Lidditz, I happen to use their mug. It's the very beginning of December. So ours is December 1, 2, and 3 this year. And we're going to do a hybrid event, but we're going to have, we're going to start at 125 people in person. And I anticipate that we're going to have more than that who want to come because it's going to be December.
Yeah. Well, this is how quickly the world is changing. We had to pull the trigger on that because our event takes place in the summer a couple of months ago. And a couple of months ago, there wasn't anybody that was recommending to me to go ahead and plan something in person.
Yeah.
I bet if we were to have that conversation again today, there would be a percentage saying, well, I'd gladly travel. I'm ready to start doing stuff like that again. So, but yeah, we're virtual one more year. Yeah. So we've talked about maybe trying to do something in the fall for anybody who wants to get together and see one another. We're a very close-knit group of people in the league. So I can't promise y'all that that's going to happen, but we're looking into it. Okay, Steve, we've got questions that people have been asking while you've been talking. Let's start answering.
Yeah, let's do questions.
And this one we've talked about, but I'm going to say it again just because I think it is, if I were running a venue, it'd be my top question too. How comfortable are we about how truthful people will be about their vaccination status? I'm zero comfortable with that, but I think we've said that's really not, that's not the concern, right? We just simply decide what we feel needs to happen at our venue, and the chips fall where they may after that, right?
Yeah, it's not
Can't
that
put
I
a lie
don't...
detector on people.
Well, that's right. Even vaccine passports, if you're watching this in New York, congratulations on the Excelsior Pass, which I'm going to download to my phone tonight because I'm flying to New York in a few days. But they're only as valid as the information that people put into them. And unfortunately, proof of vaccination was not a priority when the vaccines were being developed. So here we have this 50-state solution with no uniformity and no ability to, have really ironclad documentation.
Yeah.
Oh, well.
So you got to do the best with the information that you have at hand. Can I still ask patrons vaccination status in Arizona, even with the governor's executive order to restrict businesses from asking vaccination status? Steve?
I'm going to punt on that because, sorry, this is an Arizona question. Since you're in Arizona, you probably know me. Just shoot me an email, ask me the question, and I'll look it up. Our governor, Doug Ducey, has issued a series of executive orders. They're not quite Ron DeSantis level, but they're pretty egregious infringements on what normally would be property rights. So it's really fascinating, not to drive this into the political ditch, but normally property rights are considered pretty sacrosanct on the right. And yet these executive orders precluding property owners from asking legitimate health and safety questions are a fascinating infringement on property rights. So, depending on your politics, which way are you going to swing on this one? Because there is no safe harbor on the right. Anyway, shoot me an email and I will get you the Arizona answer. I just haven't looked at Governor Ducey's latest executive order.
And Roxanne, if you don't have Steve's email, email me and I'll get it to you. What is our recourse if a staff member is unwilling to be vaccinated?
Oh, well, frankly, that is both easy and difficult. It's easy in the sense that the answer is obvious. Bye-bye. It's a condition of employment. No less than, if somebody has to wear high vis, they have to wear high vis. It is simply a condition of employment. It is no more complicated than that. I understand that there are difficult conversations to be had if you have people like that. I'm not suggesting for a moment that that's an easy conversation. It is, however, a very simple one.
Yeah. So I want to remind everybody here, we're all grown-ups. And, you can lead a horse to water. The attorney can give you as much advice as he can. Ultimately, you're going to have to decide what's right for your venue. Because I hear you. I mean, you have the right as an employer to say that's condition of, your employment here. It's much different when you're sitting across from someone you love and respect who's worked for you to say, well, then you got to go. So that'll be interesting to see how that sort of begins to play out in this reopening world we're going into.
Let's not be such hard asses that we lose sight of the human element here. There are people who have reasons for things that look like they're not so reasonable. So I'm sort of trafficking in absolutes here just for the sake of, staking out territory that you guys can think about. But if it were me and it were someone that I cared about, I would talk to them. I would say, look, this is important from a health standpoint. Let's talk about what your concerns are about getting vaccinated. And, if it's really important to you not to get vaccinated and you're an important person to us, to our family here at the venue, maybe there's a workaround that will protect everyone else, such as, getting very frequent PCR tests. PCR is it's the type of test with by far the highest test validity. The rapid antigen or even antibody tests are much less accurate, particularly if someone is asymptomatic. So really the PCR test is the only one that you want to negotiate about. But if it's somebody that I cared about, I would first talk to them and see if I could, smoke out what actually is their objection to getting the vaccine. And if it's a reason that, you consider legitimate and appropriate under your circumstances, I would try to find a workaround to keep them working.
Yeah. By the way, the PCR, is that what you said? The test PCR? Yeah. Is that PCR readily available and affordable?
PCR is polymerase chain reaction. It's free. Every PCR test is covered under the Federal CARES Act of 2020. It is a free test. I said that twice. I'll say it a third time. PCR tests are free. The only challenge
commercial right now, free. There's commercial. We're an insurance commercial or something like that.
I'm underscoring this because I don't think a PCR test is a good surrogate for getting vaccinated. But if somebody has an objection that you consider valid enough under your own circumstances, a PCR test is the only substitute that I would accept. And there is no one in this country who has a legitimate reason to object even to a PCR test because it's free. It is slightly inconvenient because you have to get it and then it takes a couple of days to be sent to a lab to get the results. So in order for a PCR test really to be useful to you, if you're an event operator or a venue operator, they pretty much have to quarantine themselves after they get their test until they get the results back, because the test is only a snapshot of their condition at the moment that they give, their nasal swab.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, now that you mentioned that, my daughter chose to live on campus at her university, and twice a week she had to be tested. That was the condition of, and she, what does it say that my daughter wanted a nasal swab twice a week rather than being forced to live at home with me? Oh, man.
And we'll discuss that offline.
Okay. Aloha, could you please address the nuance, if one exists, between requiring vaccines for staff versus requiring vaccines for volunteers?
There is no nuance there at all, as far as I'm concerned. Anybody who is doing work for you, anybody who has a right to wear your polo shirt, should follow your rules.
Okay.
And, this hits pretty close to home for me. My mother is a volunteer docent at a local house museum where my parents live in New York. And she has to abide by all of the rules of that venue, even though they've never paid her a dime. She just does it because she loves it. Your volunteers all have to follow your rules, your safety rules, as well as, in this case, your health rules. There is no daylight at all between your paid staff versus your volunteers in this context.
Right. Yeah, I don't know about everyone on this call, but at the Paramount in Austin, when I was there, most of our volunteers were of an age group that is at very high risk of, I hope to God they got vaccinated, and would certainly make that, I would be insisting that with the volunteer group that I had. But can you please share the link? Yes. So someone's asking me to share the link. So believe it or not, Dory, you got the link from me 3 times. But I know that the automatic emails that come through Zoom, they're very hard to edit. And so as hard as I tried to make those link visible to y'all in the reminders and your registration confirmation, I will send a dedicated email to the entire league membership with this link again, and then it'll also include a link to this video on demand. So yeah. Dory, yes, I will get you a link to the guide that we're referencing. Can you speak to back?
Sorry, Ken, another place that you can go if you're deeply impatient, you can go to eventsafetyalliance.org, and there is a link on our homepage to the Safe and Sound guidance.
Great, thank you. Can you please speak to vaccinated people getting infected with COVID? That's a great, Steve and I, for those of y'all that signed on early, Steve and I had this conversation. I just was at a family gathering where I was told that all of my family members had been vaccinated, only to find out that one had not. And I got the call 24 hours later that my niece was testing positive for COVID and we had all been exposed. I have been vaccinated, and Steve, you're telling me, based on all the research, I'm good, yeah. Right?
So I'm a big baseball fan. Here, I'll turn my camera. You can see I'm a Boston Red Sox fan. So this story kind of amuses me. 8 members of the New York Yankees traveling party, I think 7 members of the coaching and training staff and 1 player, despite having been vaccinated, I think with the Johnson & Johnson 1-shot vaccine, tested positive in the last week. That can happen. None of the 8 showed any symptoms. It's that Major League Baseball is still testing players very frequently. So they tested positive. None of them felt any symptoms whatsoever. So that is a rare possibility, but it does happen. It's extremely rare. And they all felt fine, and none of them have transmitted the virus to anyone else. It's just that they're a traveling party and they gave it to each other.
Okay. So I hopefully that answered the question about people vaccinated and their risk of COVID. That it's not something that we right now need to be too terribly worried about.
No,
these vaccines are highly effective.
They are highly effective. And you're listening to a theater operator and an owner, so and a lawyer. So take that in context. But this is research you can, and if you have doubts, should do for yourself because it is readily available. CDC.org has massive quantities of FAQ
Oh, is it
pages about every.
You froze up for just a second there, Stephen. I wasn't sure if
Oh,
it was
sorry.
me or you, but so the CDC has all you can get this research if what we've told you isn't making you feel any better about your uneasiness. Hey, Steve, this is a good one because this is going to be attorney versus attorney. So we've got someone on here who had an HR attorney advise them that they cannot lay off someone that will not or cannot take the vaccine, but we can require anyone new to have the vaccine. We can require staff members who have not received the vaccine to wear masks. So obviously, if this was me, I'm going to listen to the attorney that I'm comfortable in working with, but this is an attorney who's saying, no, you can't get rid of somebody because they don't want to be vaccinated if you've made that a requirement of employment.
I have known a fair number of HR people in my day. They're not attorneys.
I think this was an HR attorney. So this was an attorney who specializes in human resources.
Okay. I would respectfully question my fellow attorney then. I think that's wrong.
Okay.
You can condition employment. Here, let me say this the right way. So I'm going to say this like a lawyer now. This won't hurt a bit. Under the Due Process Clause of the United States Constitution, people cannot be discriminated against based on a very strictly enumerated list of categories, which includes the ones that you're all familiar with: race, gender, sexual orientation, through a legislative addition to the Due Process Clause, age, a few others, religion. Other than those enumerated reasons that one cannot discriminate, you can. You can. And so vaccine status, last I checked, is not in the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution, nor is it in a state constitution. So can you discriminate based on someone's vaccine status? You know, I guess my answer to this HR attorney would be, please show me your authority, because count me as skeptical, because I've read the US Constitution and I don't see where vaccine status is a protected class.
Okay.
Show me.
All right. So there's your answer. This one looks like just clarification, because we're going back to an earlier question. I'm assuming when you say we can legally ask employees if they are vaccinated, in the case you were responding to someone who was in Arizona, does this hold true for other states as well? This particular person's in Massachusetts.
In the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, my former home, hi and welcome. Look forward to seeing you again sometime really soon, and go Sox! In the Commonwealth, I believe Governor Baker has not limited in any way what you can ask. And frankly, I would be astonished if he did. So I'm pretty confident that throughout the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, you can ask whatever question you want, again, so long as it does not intrude upon the 14th Amendment to the US Constitution.
Okay. Here's a good one. Well, they're all good, but I meant I didn't consider this, which is, if we make vaccine condition of employment, what are the OSHA recording requirements? And then it says example adverse reaction. The
OSHA recording and reporting requirements will apply just like to any other workplace illness or injury. You have to report what you have to report, and this is simply another manifestation. The good news is, if you take this conversation that Ken and I have been having seriously, you won't have coronavirus infections on your site among your workers, because your workers will all be vaccinated. So there's the best answer to your question. it is, respectfully, it is largely irrelevant if you do the thing that mitigates the risk most fully.
Gotcha. I'm in Virginia and our governor is lifting mitigation measures, distancing and capacity as of May 28th. Does this mean that extreme sanitation measures need to be continued? So you talk about that in the guide, the cleaning schedules and everything.
Yeah. So here I'm holding up my little travel size bottle of Purell. I would kiss this, but that's unsanitary. So let me just say, humans are disgusting. We are filthy creatures. We always have been. The fact that we are very, very, very unlikely to transmit coronavirus through our sticky, disgusting, mucus-covered fingers doesn't mean that we should stop cleaning things. It just means we should clean things because we are filthy, disgusting creatures with bad habits that all of our mothers would just furrow their brows in disappointment at us. That's why sanitary practices should continue to improve, because they sucked before, but not because of coronavirus.
Okay. All right. If I think the important word here is if there is a legal reason in our state not to ask vaccination status of patrons, and the reason I'm stressing if is because I don't know if there is a legal reason, but if there is,
well, so if, for example, you're in Florida, where Governor DeSantis has precluded that question,
and we are allowed to fully reopen, do you recommend for the safety of unvaccinated patrons that we require a mask of everyone, since we know now social distancing doesn't matter if ventilation is poor?
That's a really interesting question.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting question, and frankly requires me to dial down my snarkiness a lot, because I do care about the health of even vaccine hesitant people, which I think is an extremely polite term for something that I think is really pretty awful. But we don't want them to get sick. So yeah, the straight answer to your question is, if you know that there are going to be a material number of non-vaccinated people in your venue, and you know that your HVAC is old and that there are no doors or windows to open, we've just gone through the safe in sound recommendations. If that is your circumstance, yes, a reasonable person under that circumstance would require face coverings on everybody. Having said that, if you are in that environment, best of luck to you enforcing a face covering requirement, particularly among the people who are vaccine hesitant.
Yeah.
They're the ones most likely to say, I never needed a face covering. Why would I need one now?
Yeah.
And they will simply be free riders. That's an economic term, but you can look that up too. The non-vaccinated people who refuse to wear face coverings will simply be free riders on the good behavior, the vaccination choice made by everyone else. Their risk of getting coronavirus will be substantially reduced, not because of anything they did, but rather despite everything they did because of good behavior by everyone else.
Right. So I just want to point this out because in here you talk about air circulation. We just mentioned it. We are in fact, all of us are historic theaters, and we just heard from someone. We have an internal communication board, Steve, and we have a member who spent $630,000 upgrading all of their ventilation stuff. And one of the great things that came out of it said, hey, we don't smell like an old theater anymore. So yay for that. But I meant some of us are not going to be able to do a whole lot simply for the fact the buildings that we work in. So that's again, your community, your patrons, how hard you want to fight that mask battle. It depends on what about your space, the people who are going into it, and your desire to keep everyone safe. But that's tough, particularly for historic theaters, because we don't have windows and doors to open in the middle of a
No.
dark, and we're cramming a lot of people into seats that were built in a space for when Americans were much smaller than they are today. So
Well, that's right.
yeah.
There's always the advice to pick your battles carefully. You want to reopen at an economically viable level.
Correct.
And balanced against that is you don't want to get anyone sick or dead. Those are tough choices. They don't balance very well. But that's the situation that we're all faced with.
So I'm going to ask this question, even though, yes, in fact, it has been answered, but it was the one thing I wanted. If you took nothing else away from this session, I wanted y'all to be aware of this. So this person's saying, my apologies if you've already covered this. Yes, we have, but it's still good to repeat it. I thought HIPAA prevents us from asking employees about vaccination status. Steve, once again, it does not.
It does not. HIPAA applies to medical facilities. If you're watching this conversation, you probably are not running a medical facility. HIPAA also relates to medical conditions. Your vaccine status is not a medical condition. And so the two prongs on which HIPAA is based do not apply. Neither of them applies to a historic theater in the US.
Okay. This is a good one, Steve, because on our call earlier, there's a whole nother group of people that we haven't really talked about, which is the artists who are traveling to put on these shows. Have you heard of venues mandating that shows must travel with a vaccinated touring crews? And if not, I'm curious as to your take if a venue is in a position contractually or otherwise to require that.
The contractually part is the easiest part to answer. I would want to look at your contract. So whoever asked that good question, the answer to whether your contract contains language that you can enforce is simply a matter of looking at your contract. I would guess that if your contract predates the pandemic, you have nothing close to language that would allow you to enforce, any vaccine status by the tour or anybody on it. You can consider adding such language and making sure that it's part of any tour rider or package that you give to a tour that's considering coming to your venue. Frankly, I think that's a good idea, but again, it depends on where you're located. If I had a venue in a place that was, red tinged, I might just pass on that idea because I know that I couldn't enforce it and get performers to come to my house. And, it's all well and good to talk about filling the seats, but if you have nobody on stage, you're not really going to have a lot of revenue. So there are a lot of reality checks here.
Yeah. This theater, we updated our HVAC system in our 121-year-old theater, yay!
Wow.
In 2018. So you've got a fairly new system in there, and they're wanting to know what are your feelings about I call them MERV, M-E-R-V, filters.
MERV filters are good. There are MERV ratings. I'm no HVAC repairman, but
I keep seeing MERV 13 and MERV 21 or something like that.
Yeah. So what I've been advising my clients to do is, if you are contemplating upgrading your HVAC, there are professional HVAC technicians, and you want to talk to them about what your capacity is right now in the before, what you can get up to given the physical constraints of your venue, and what's it going to cost. Because last I checked, most of us didn't have a really good revenue stream last year. And I know that federal funds are, well, we hear talk that they're coming, but I don't think they've arrived on anyone's doorstep just yet. So I would be careful about committing a lot of money to upgrading HVAC until you've got patrons back in seats.
Okay, Steve, we are at exactly an hour. Unless you have to run, I have 3 more questions that we haven't gotten.
No, let's do it.
Can we do those? Okay, so everybody, these questions kept getting, you got to stop asking questions because Steve and I do eventually have to stop this call. But let me get through these last
But this is fun, isn't it?
Yeah,
And
it is.
useful.
It's just like last time. Just like we were making a lot of guesses last time because pandemic was new to us. This time we have a lot of information, with us to be able to give answers. What control do we have over our stagehand union regarding the rule to be vaccinated? So does a union make this more complicated, Steve? And many of us are union houses.
Yes. So you are bound by union rules. It's really no different than the last question that we addressed, which was about artist rules. Your contract with your artist is no less or more binding than your contract with your union. I guess what I would add to that is your unionized labor has all of the same positive incentives to get vaccinated and work safely as your non-unionized labor. They've all been out of work for the last year and change, and I think they have pretty strong incentives to do whatever is necessary to get back to it. They got a lot of time to make up. So, I don't have a particular position on, the merits of unionization, but I guess my position as far as getting workers back to work in my venue is ask, and you may well receive.
Yeah. We are seeing artist contracts that state if we cancel the show due to COVID, we are still obligated to pay the artist. We are wanting to add the language unless the local, state, or federal government mandates closure or limited occupancy. What are your thoughts about adding that language, Steve?
You almost certainly do not have to. So I understand the instinct, but this is now, Steve Adelman pontificating about contract language that I cannot see, but I think this will be accurate. The provision that we're talking about here is called a force majeure clause. It's in every contract that any of you would ever sign. The force majeure clause, it's horrendous. It's part of the Lawyers' Full Employment Act because it actually resolves nothing. But in this extremely rare instance, COVID-19, force majeure provisions actually work. And so I would make a prediction and actually bet a very small amount of money on the answer. So if you are watching this, when you're done, not now, but when we're done, look at your contract. Go to like the third to last page. You'll find the force majeure provision. It will say something to the effect of, in the event that this event is canceled through no fault of either party, and the reason for cancellation renders performance either impossible or impracticable due to causes which include but are not limited to, and then there'll be a parade of horribles, then neither party is at fault and the contract will simply be rescinded. That's what a force majeure provision says. Here's the point. The point is the contents of that parade of horribles do not matter because the list is simply including but not limited to, which means anything else applies just as much. But even better than that, that's just legal interpretation of contract stuff. Almost certainly, one of the items in the parade of horribles is government mandate or government intervention or government order. It'll be some act of government which renders performance of the obligations under the contract either completely impossible or illegal, or in some other respect, just impracticable, meaning it doesn't make sense to do it. Almost certainly you already have that language, so you don't need to add it.
Yeah, I know for the league that got us out of certain contracts we had with hotels when we had to cancel conferences. Going into this pandemic. So, okay.
If the governor issues an order that means that you cannot open, then there is no damage for either party. Basically, the contract is just dissolved.
Okay. So even though, Steve, I said no more questions, someone snuck one in, but this is truly the last one. And I'm not, this might be we might need to get a trade expert in here on this one. I'm not sure, but what is your recommendation or experience with ionization or other systems as additions to HVAC?
That is honestly above my technological pay grade. I'm sorry,
Let me
I don't
actually,
know the answer.
for those of y'all that have stuck this out to the end with us, there actually is another guide that's coming out from the organization that oversees that trade, that industry. We haven't seen a final version of it yet, and it speaks to filterization. It speaks to all the mechanical and other technical things about filtration systems. So as soon as we have a final version of that, I'll share that with y'all. But again, some of you are in historic theaters where you know you're just not going to be able to fix some of the things they probably want you to do. But
Yeah.
okay, Steve, yeah, go ahead.
So I'm just glancing at the chat right now, and I see a one right at the end from Bjorn Olsen, which I think is worth reading because it's absolutely correct, and I don't want there to be any confusion about this. So Bjorn writes, vaccines are not a magic shield keeping viruses out. They just help your body react much quicker and more fully. So technically, you can get infected, but are very unlikely to get symptoms or spread the virus. That is exactly what a vaccine does. So Bjorn, good for you for stating that correctly and succinctly. Vaccines don't immunize you from everything. What they do is they shield your body from the effects of contracting a virus.
Okay.
And that's what all vaccines do, whether we're talking about coronavirus or any other kind of vaccine that you got as a little kid.
Steve, I cannot thank you enough once again for doing this. I have a little gift that I'm going to drop in the mail to you that I think you will enjoy.
Oh, you're fabulous. Thank you.
No, truthfully, we're going to have a session during our conference called Silver Linings. Hey, let's talk about some of the good things that came out of this terrible, horrible year we just left there. And one of them would be that we met you. And so thank you, sir, for all the work. And I do want to let everyone know, Steve is not getting paid to be here. He wasn't paid to be here last year. He did this out of the kindness of his heart and his love of our industry. So Steve, thank you very much for your time.
Well, you're very welcome. And when all of you good people are reopened, I travel a lot for my work and for presentations. Frankly, I would love to visit. So if any of you happen to be in Fairfield County, Connecticut next week, drop me a note because that's where I'm going. I'm going to hang out with my parents for a few days. And I will be in Nashville in July. And so let me, if you haven't had quite enough of me yet, I would be delighted to visit because I love the sort of buildings that you guys operate.
And as a favor to me, if Steve comes knocking at your theater door, let him in, please, because he has earned the right to see, tour, or otherwise visit any historic theater in America. Steve, thank you. To everyone, I want to remind you, we're going to be doing another one of our happy hours next Wednesday. This one we are affectionately calling the SBA Detox. So we're going to give you the latest we have on SVOG, PPP, and ERTC, so the SBA alphabet soup. So pour yourself a martini and let's unfortunately talk about something we'd all like to stop talking about, which is these SBA programs that we just want done, administered, funded, and moved on so we can now reopen. Steve, thank you again for your time. Everyone, thank you for joining us. And don't forget the annual conference, July 12th, 13th, and 14th. Steve, be good.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care, everybody.